Hey, David, look at Deuteronomy 17 real quick for us. I want you to read a couple verses. You know, one of the things that when I grew up as a young believer, I would always think that the Old Testament was really about rules, laws, and obedience, and the New Testament was about the heart. And really, once you begin to kind of start studying the Scriptures, you begin to realize just how much God talks about the heart in the Old Testament. That it wasn't just about rules and obedience, that He wanted the hearts. In fact, He would be willing to give up sacrifices. He didn't want just sacrifices, He wanted the hearts of His people. Did you look at that, Dave? Deuteronomy 17? Read verses 16 and 17 real quick.
16 and 17.
Yeah, read it nice and loud for everybody to hear. Deuteronomy 17, 16 and 17.
Only he must not acquire many horses for himself or cause the people to return to Egypt in order to acquire many horses, since the Lord has said to you, you shall never return that way again, and he shall not acquire any wives for himself, lest his heart turn away, nor shall he acquire for himself excessive silver and gold.
So here's a prohibition in Deuteronomy where God now is saying, listen, you're going to have a king. I want you to choose a king that I choose for you. Whatever you do, I want you to guard what? What does God want more than anything for these kings to guard? Their hearts. And there's things in this world that over time can change the heart. It goes back to Proverbs 4:23. Guard your heart above all else, for it is the source of life. And we could go on and on just looking at different passages. Chris is about to start a series, I think this Sunday, on the book of James. Should be great to going through that. If you look at James chapter 1, I'm not going to steal any of Chris's thunder, I hope, but look at James chapter 1. I want to show you a very interesting passage and how God connects the heart. And beginning in verse 14, James says this, but each person is tempted when he is drawn away and enticed by his own evil desire. And that word is a kind of a translation. It's an interpretive translation, evil desire. It's a word that just means desire, but typically means the desire to fulfill the desires of the flesh or the appetitive appetites, these appetites that we have in life. And everything starts with these desires, these appetites that we have. And he says, we're tempted by these appetites that we have. Verse 15, then after the desire or these appetites has conceived. How does an appetite, how does a desire get conceived?
It's fed and nourished.
It's fed. You're thinking about it. It's on your mind. You can't get it out of your head, or you're not blocking out of your head. And suddenly it gets conceived. Meaning now, what have you done? You now act on it. And he says, it's conceived and it gives birth to sin. Well, what is sin? Well, I like what one theologian called it. Sin is anything that moves us away from shalom. Well, what is shalom? What is biblical shalom? It literally means a wholeness. It's a peace that comes with it. It's peace, but it's a wholeness of being right with God. That my life is aligned in such a way that there is a congruency between me and God. The greater the incongruency between our lives and God, the greater the divide, the greater the lack of peace there's going to be in terms of our relationship with God. And it says, it gives birth to sin. And when sin is fully grown, what's this assuming? What happens when it's fully grown? What are we doing to make it fully grown?
Feeding it.
You're feeding it. That's how something gets fully grown, is you feed it. And you don't just stumble, fall, struggle. You then begin to just throw in the towel and you just feed it. And you feed it. And once it is fully grown, what does it give birth to? Death. It gives birth to, finally he speaks. Thank you, Chad. Death. It gives birth to death. In other words, now the heart is in some senses dead to the things of God. The conscience has been seared all the way to the point of great evil can be done. The things that a man maybe at one point of his life said, I would never do this. Suddenly, 20, 30, 40 years later in his life, he finds himself doing all of the things he said he would never do. And this is how it's conceived. It starts off with these appetitive desires, these appetites of the flesh that take root in our minds and our heart, and then we feed it. It gives birth to sin, and then we feed it. It grows fully, and it gives birth to death. This is the picture of Solomon. So if you go now to 1 Kings chapter 10, okay, go to 1 Kings chapter 10, we're going to see the wheels slowly begin to come off of Solomon. We're going to look at 10, and maybe if we can, we're going to get into 11. But if you remember last week in chapter 9, we said we began to detect some vibration. Remember I talked to you about a buddy of mine, that my first client that was a manufacturing client, he was the manager over all rotating equipment. And he said, Walter, the greatest threat to rotating equipment is vibration. The moment you begin to detect vibration, you need to get on it immediately and fix it, because all that vibration will do over time is what? It's going to make it worse. It's going to cause damage. It's going to cost a lot more money later, so fix it now. And what we're going to see in Solomon's life is vibration. We begin to see some of this in chapter 9. Now you get to chapter 10, and Solomon gets a visitor. Look at this. In verse 1, the Queen of Sheba heard about Solomon's fame connected with the name of the Lord and came to test him with difficult questions. We don't know exactly where Sheba is. There's a lot of debate. Could it be in southern Arabia? Could it be in Africa? Is it in Yemen? Is it Ethiopia? We're not really sure exactly where Sheba is, but it's a long way away. Most scholars estimate that Sheba probably came some 1,000 miles with a caravan of a bunch of stuff we're about to see, just because she heard the reputation of Solomon. So she has a bunch of difficult questions for him. She came to Jerusalem with a very large entourage with camels bearing spices, gold in great abundance, and precious stones. She came to Solomon and spoke to him about everything that was on her mind. So make a point. Solomon's name and reputation has gone out before him. It is spread. People hear about him. And the reason is because the people in Israel, they have shipping in the south. They've got people, foreigners, coming into Israel all the time. Israel is a powerhouse. And so the reputation of Israel, the reputation of Solomon, has gone out to all the nations around them. Sheba hears about this, and she now wants to hear for herself the wisdom of Solomon that everybody talks about. And in one sense, remember we talked about this principle. What did it mean back then? What does it always mean? What does it mean for me today? Well, what it meant back then was Solomon was given special wisdom by God. And it was so great. He built such an incredible palace. The temple was so beautiful. Everybody heard about it. And so they now want to come and test Solomon. Sheba wants to test Solomon. Well, what does this always mean? What does it always mean? What would be a principle you could extract from that idea that Solomon gains wisdom from God and Sheba wants to come hear from him? Let's apply together. What's a principle that's true?
Verified.
What's that?
Verified.
One more time.
Verified.
Verify? What does that mean?
Found to be true.
Okay, she came and verified. Yeah, she came for herself, to see for herself. And Solomon is prepared. He begins to answer all of the questions. What's always true is this, that when you know God, one of the great advantages of knowing God is that you have what's known as a unity of knowledge. That we have an understanding of who God is. We understand about the nature of man. We understand about the flow of history. We understand about salvation. We understand about sin. We understand all of these things that come with simply a knowledge of God and a knowledge of His Word. And so there's wisdom that comes from that. We should all have wisdom. As we spend time in God's Word, we have greater wisdom. And so as we now go about our lives, we talked about this last week, can you be wise and not live wisely? Yes, you can. Solomon is a great example of that. You can be very wise. And do you remember how we defined wisdom last week? We said wisdom is insight towards the good. In other words, that at any given moment where I have to make a decision, I have insight to know what is it that leads to the good. Well, what's the good? The good is that which causes flourishing. The good is that which is in alignment with God's ways. That's what's good. Good is that which flourishes. So if this choice causes me not to flourish, it's not wise. If somebody does something that upsets me, for me to go to them and rage at them is not going to cause flourishing. That would not necessarily be a wise choice to make for me to go handle it that way. I would want to go and talk to them and try to create an opportunity for them to be able to hear what it is that I have to say. I'm going to pursue a wise path, because that is what leads to flourishing, is the understanding of the other person. So the choices we make every day are either in alignment with the good or they're not. When I act in a certain way that doesn't lead to the things that please God, which we all do, by the way, on a regular basis. If I know that this action that I'm participating in is not leading to peace with someone, then I'm not acting wisely. In fact, what I know is I can look at my flesh and I can look at sin in my life and I can say that pride is getting the best of me right now, and now that is what's keeping me from flourishing the way God would have me flourish. Therefore, what does wisdom say? Well, wisdom says, humble yourself before the Lord. Humble yourself. And that's hard to do, isn't it? Anybody had a hard time being humbled this week? It's hard to do sometimes. And yet that's what God calls us to do. You know, back in the medieval times, when they were talking about things like the 7 deadly sins. You guys are probably familiar with the 7 deadly sins. Things like, what are they? There's 7 of them. We don't have to name all 7. What are some of the deadly sins that are classic? Gluttony. Sloth. Love that word. Lust. Anger. Pride. See, these are all, well, there used to be a distinction between 2 of the deadly sins that later Christian theologians began to bridge them together as the same thing, but they're not the same thing. In fact, Rebecca DeYoung, she's just a great Christian philosopher and writer. She talks about the distinction between these 2, and we see it here with Solomon. There is a distinction between what's called pride and vainglory. Vainglory used to be seen as a separate vice, a separate sin. What's the difference between pride and vainglory? Well, pride is the pursuit of excellence for oneself over everyone else. It's elevating myself over everyone else. It's me wanting the best for me and not caring, because it's the best, not caring about anybody else. In fact, a person who has all pride and no vainglory, they don't even care what other people think. If someone said, you could have this, no one else will have it but you, but no one else will know you have it. The person who's full of pride but not vainglory, they'll take it. Why? Because all they care about is what? Themselves. And what they have and what no one else has. And they don't care what anybody else thinks. The person who commits the sin of vainglory doesn't necessarily care about being the best. They just want to care about being perceived as the best. It's a vainglory that their image is what matters to them. See, so when you look at Solomon, you see both pride and vainglory. The pride in that he's the king, and you're about to see, you already saw what he's built. Now you're about to see his entire kingdom, what he fills it with. And he's got vainglory. He wants everyone to see who he is, see what he has. He wants to show off the wisdom that God has given him. See? And both of those go right to the heart. So she comes and she's going to test them. And we too, as believers, we have wisdom. God has given us wisdom. And so as we're out at work and with our friends and with our neighbors and our family, hopefully we're not just communicating wisely, we're seeking to live wisely. And if we do it really, really well, maybe sometimes people look and go, wow, the way she lives her life just has produced a fruit in their life that comes from God's ways. That's what's happening here. Sheba comes and says, I've heard of you. I want to test you in your knowledge. And so, verse 3, Solomon answered all of her questions. Nothing was too difficult for the king to explain to her. Right? We should always try to be ready to give an answer, to give wise counsel whenever we can. When the Queen of Sheba observed all of Solomon's wisdom, the palace he had built, the food at his table, his servants' residence, his attendants' service and their attire, his cupbearers, and the burnt offerings he offered at the Lord's temple, she was without spirit. That's what it says, literally. It took her breath away. She couldn't believe the opulence and the wisdom of Solomon. It was greater than what she had even heard. Verse 6, she said to the king, the report I heard in my own country about your words and about your wisdom is true, but I didn't believe the reports until I came and saw it with my own eyes. And then she says, indeed, I was not even told half. Your wisdom and prosperity far exceed the report that I heard. I think this is I made a note here. This is a great word for us as the church. You know, as people who, by God's grace, have come to know Him, we should be people who are considered wise people. Do you think that the world sees us, the church, as wise people in this world? A lot of times, no. And probably because why? It's not because we don't have wisdom. It's probably not because we don't have knowledge that God has given us. What is it that actually intercepts the world's ability to perceive us as wise?
The way that we respond to the world.
It's the way that we respond to it. It's the way that we leverage knowledge and wisdom. We use it as a stick. We use it as a battering ram. We use it to build walls between us and the world. It's us against them. It's white hats and black hats. It's good versus evil. And we create this division between us and the world. And the world looks at us and they see us as seeing them as the enemy. Isn't that true? And today, more than ever, I think the world sees it, the church sees them as the enemy. And all we do now is we batten down the hatches. And everything is about protecting what we got. And we can't let darkness spread in our land, as opposed to letting the light of God in our lives begin to spread and shine before men, so that people actually witness personally. See what Sheba said? I heard, but when I came and saw, what I saw was even half of what I heard. In other words, when people begin to build relationship with us, what should they say? What should the world say when they actually begin to know you? They didn't just hear of you, but now they know you. And what are they saying?
Are you better than what we've seen?
You're even better. Yeah, you're far better than what I thought. In fact, what I thought was that you weren't very good. I thought that you were a judgmental, condemning, arrogant person. But you know what? The reality is that's not true at all. In fact, you're one of the most kind and loving and gentle and wise people. You're always there for me. You're always extending a helping hand. See? And so as people who don't have that relationship with God get to know us, does my life make them go, wow, you are not at all what I expected? I mean, I knew you were a person of faith. I knew that you went to this particular church, but now that I got to know you, you exceed what I thought you were going to be. Boy, what a compliment. You guys ever been given that compliment? You're not what I expected. I'm surprised by you. And I think that's how we should live our life. She's completely taken back and blown away by Solomon's wisdom and his ways. And then she says in verse 8, how happy are your men? How happy are these servants of yours who always stand in your presence hearing your wisdom? That word happy, you know where else that is? It's in, look at this, go to Psalm 1. Let me just show it to you. Go to Psalm 1. It's the same word that's used in the Beatitudes when Jesus says, blessed is the one, happy is the one. Psalm 1:1 says, "How happy is the one who does not walk in the advice of the wicked, or stand in the pathway of sinners, or sit in the company of mockers. Instead, their delight is in the Lord's instruction, and they meditate on it day and night. He is like a tree planted beside flowing streams that bears its fruit in its season, and its leaf does not wither." Whatever he does, what's your Bible say? Prospers. Salak is this word of flourishing. You prosper. It's like a tree planted by the waters, and it's fed these nutrients, and this tree flourishes. That's the word. It's flourish. And what in 1 Kings 10 she's saying is, even the people around you that you're responsible for, they flourish because of you. They prosper because of you. Why is that? What is it that we are doing that causes the people around us to prosper and to flourish? What are we doing? What should we be doing?
God's will.
Which is? That's always a safe answer, Chad.
Yeah.
We should be investing our time, investing our resources, spending time with them, helping them to flourish. That our goal as believers, it doesn't mean you should have 1,000 people you're doing this with, but we should always, at any time we're with people, we should always be operating out of the framework of, how can my life help this life to flourish? How can my time with this person help them to prosper? And maybe that's going to be through wisdom. Maybe that's going to be listening, taking the time to hear how they're doing and listen and empathize. And if asked, give some ideas and counsel and wisdom. Help them to think through what they're going through. Sacrificially giving up of our time. That we should not be a selfish people with our time. And we should give opportunities and try to connect people to people so that people see that, man, ever since I've gotten in Dwayne's life, my life has just gotten better. He introduced me to this person. He speaks wisdom into my life. He encourages my heart. He strengthens me as a person. It's just ever since I've met this person, my life flourishes because of this person. Could you imagine if we lived our lives in such a way to cause the people all around us to flourish? Or if you're a business owner, that your people say, it would be like climbing a 200-foot wall to leave this company. See, most companies, it's like a picket fence to leave. You just kind of hop over it because somebody down the road is going to give you an extra couple of days of vacation a year. Or I'm making 5% more of my salary, so see ya. And people leave businesses left and right. But you're a business owner. No, you got to run a business where it's like a 200-foot wall that this person says to leave him, to leave her. It would be like climbing a wall that's so high that nothing can beat. Why would I go anywhere? My life flourishes. It prospers because of this person. You know how many people, like in my work, how many people who are believers, they know God. I know they do. We talk about it. And I watch the way they lead their people, lead their teams, lead their companies. And people would leave them in a heartbeat. There's nothing special about them. There's nothing extra about them. It's just another job, see? And they're placed in such a place that their life, as Sheba says, your men, everyone around you, salak, flourishes, prospers because of you. Isn't that great? Verse 9, she says, what a great blessing. Blessed be the Lord your God. What a statement. She observes, she watches, she has firsthand knowledge, and ultimately she sees the source of all of Solomon's blessing. And she blesses his God. We don't know if the Queen of Sheba knows the God of Israel. Probably doesn't. She's come a long way away. She's intrigued. But what she can say is, blessed be the Lord your God. He delighted in you and put you on the throne of Israel because of the Lord's eternal love for Israel. He has made you king to carry out justice and righteousness. Then she gave the king 4.5 tons of gold. Imagine that. Nice gift. That's a gift. She didn't bring him a bottle of wine. She gave him $335 million. Nice little deposit. That's a great gift. A great quantity of spices and precious stones. Never again did such a quantity of spices arrive as those the Queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. In addition, Hiram's fleet that carried gold from Ophir brought back Ophir a large quantity of almug wood and precious stones. The king made the almug wood into steps for the Lord's temple and the king's palace, and into lyres and harps for the singers. Never before did such almug wood arrive, and the like has not been seen again. He builds with almug wood. I don't even know what that is. And he builds, just to make it higher, he builds these steps that lead to the throne, just so that Solomon can be what? Even higher up. And it says, verse 13, King Solomon gave the Queen of Sheba her every desire. This is where commentators kind of speculate. There's an ancient tradition, actually, out of Ethiopia. The Ethiopian church is one of the earliest church communities in the world today. And it's the Coptic church in Ethiopia. And they have early traditions that say that Solomon and Sheba had a child together, because one of the things that Sheba wanted when she saw how great Solomon was and how wise Solomon was, she wanted a child with Solomon. And so when it says, King Solomon gave to Queen of Sheba her every desire, what reason would Solomon have to not have intimate relations with Sheba? From what you've seen so far from Solomon, is there any reason to believe Solomon wouldn't do that? What do you think? You think he has some moral order he's trying to attain of I'm only allowed to have one wife? Did monogamy rule his world? And all of a sudden here comes the Queen of Sheba with this incredible gifts she's bringing to Solomon. And it says he gives her every desire. I don't think you have to be too wise to connect those dots. Now, whether or not she in fact had a child that was Solomon's and went back to Ethiopia and created a Solomonic destiny or legacy after that, there's a lot of books about that. And if you're into conspiracies, it's a great place to read. All kinds of stuff down there. Huh?
Don't encourage it.
Yeah. It's believed actually that the Ark of the Covenant is actually buried or hidden in the church, the oldest church in Ethiopia. That Solomon, who had the Ark of the Covenant in the temple, eventually that Ark of the Covenant was sent to Ethiopia where Solomon's son was, and that the Ethiopian church, the Coptic church in Ethiopia, claims to actually have the Ark of the Covenant today. Did you know that? They claim to have it. And they haven't revealed it yet because they believe if they reveal it, it will cause all-out war. So they are sitting on it.
The Germans will try to come get it.
The
Nazis.
They will. Are they still around? They would have, yeah.
The Harrison Ford movie.
Oh, that's right, exactly. So, whatever she asked, besides what he had given her out of his royal bounty, then she, along with the servants, returned to her own country. You get now in this next 14 all the way to 22, you get this crazy list of things, right? It's like the Jungle Book now of all the stuff. Listen to this. The weight of gold that came to Solomon annually was 25 tons. That's about $2 billion a year annually. People around him are bringing him gold annually every year to be in good relations with Israel. $2 billion a year, funding his kingdom that way, not taxing his people. Is that the other nations are paying him to be in good relations with him.
How much was it?
$2 billion a year. besides what came from merchants, traders, merchandise, and all the Arabian kings and governors of the land. 16, King Solomon made 200 large shields of hammered gold. 15 pounds of gold went into each shield. He made 300 small shields of hammered gold. Nearly 4 pounds of gold went into each shield. The king put them in the house of the forest of Lebanon. That's his palace. He's got so much gold, he doesn't even know what to do with it. Let's just put gold on everything. And he's hanging it in his house, shields everywhere. I mean, these aren't fighting shields. These are decorative. He's got 300 shields hanging up on his walls when you walk into his palace. What does a shield represent? Strength, power. And that's what he's doing. See Solomon's vainglory? He wants everyone to see the power of his kingdom, the power of his kingship. Shields everywhere for people to see. Verse 18, then the king made a large ivory throne, which ivory is beautiful. You guys ever seen beautiful ivory? We used to have, my mom and dad, when we grew up overseas, and they would collect ivory. We would have beautiful ivory in our home. I remember it's a beautiful kind of a, what do you call it? What is ivory? It's not an element. What is it? Whatever. It's beautiful. What is it?
Test from elephant.
Well, I know that, but what is it? Okay, whatever.
Bone.
It's a bone. All right, there you go. Thank you. The vet says it must be true. It's so beautiful, but look, and he overlays it with gold. As if the ivory itself isn't beautiful enough. Let's go ahead and cover it in gold. The throne had 6 steps. There was a rounded top at the back of the throne, armrests on either side of the seat. 2 lions standing beside the armrest. 12 lions were standing there on the 6 steps, one at each end. Nothing like it had ever been made in any other kingdom. Solomon sits on his throne. He's got lions all around him. These steps, putting him at the top for all to see. Not just pride, but vainglory, for all to see who he is. 21. All of Solomon's drinking cups were gold. All the utensils of the house of the forest of Lebanon were gold. There was no silver, since it was considered as nothing in Solomon's time. For the king had ships of Tarshish at sea with Hiram's fleet, and once every 3 years the ships of Tarshish would arrive bearing gold, silver, ivory, apes, and peacocks. Every 3 years, these merchants would come back with stuff they got from all over the world just to bring Solomon. Peacocks and apes and baboons and all kinds of crazy things. King Solomon surpassed all the kings of the world in riches and in wisdom. The whole world wanted an audience with Solomon to hear the wisdom that God had put in his heart. Every man would bring him annual tributes: silver, gold, clothing, weapons, spices, horses, and mules. He had accumulated 1,400 chariots, 12,000 horsemen, and stationed them in the chariot cities and with the king in Jerusalem. In other words, the chariot cities were the cities of defense in Israel. And he had them positioned in such a way that they could respond immediately to any threat in the nation. He was smart. He learned to be a military leader. His power is great. 27, the king made silver as common in Jerusalem as stones. He made cedar as abundant as sycamore in the Judean foothills. Solomon's horses were imported from Egypt. What did Dave Carter read earlier in Deuteronomy 17? Whatever you do, don't go get horses from Egypt. The king's traders bought them from Q at the going price. A chariot was imported from Egypt for 15 pounds of silver and a horse for 4 pounds. In the same way, they exported them to all the kings of the Hittites and the kings of Aram through their agents. This is a business. He has got a business running. He is running on EOS right here. Heath, did you know that? Yes, that's right. He's running on this operating system that is making him some serious cash. Fat stacks every day. And he loves it. It is women, wine, it's opulence, it's everything he wants in this kingdom. He's the greatest man who has ever lived on earthly standards right now. Verse 1, chapter 11. King Solomon loved, circle it, many foreign women. in addition to Pharaoh's daughter, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, and Hittite. Those were all, by the way, those were all enemies of Israel. From the nations about which the Lord had told the Israelites, you must not intermarry with them, and they must not intermarry with you, because they will turn your heart away to follow their gods. What is it that God cares about? The heart. The heart. The question we need to ask ourselves, here's what this always means. It's not that I can't have horses. It's not that I can't have nice things. It's not that I can't buy a brand new Tahoe. It's, how does that affect my heart? Does it affect my pride? Does it affect my vainglory? How does it affect my heart? And if it does, be careful. That's what the Bible says, be careful. Because over time, like James says, you feed it and it gives birth to death over time, because I'm feeding my heart the wrong things. Look what he feeds it. He says, from the verse, you must not intermarry, verse, to these women Solomon was deeply attached in love. I'm not sure it was in love. He had 700 wives who were princesses and 300 who were concubines. Concubines were just women that you were able to take from other nations. You would provide for them. You would take care of them. You wouldn't marry them, but they would basically be there for you whenever you wanted. And then he would have 700 wives that was a lot of times made through treaties that he would make with foreign nations, and you would take a bunch of their daughters, a bunch of their women, and it would be a way of making peace with other nations. Solomon has 1,000 women at his disposal. His dad, David, remember how many wives David had? 8. Solomon says, I'll see you that, and I'll add 992 more. He has got women everywhere. I think I might have told you guys, when I told you guys about the Enneagram, and I said Solomon is a type 3. The type 3 is the vainglory person. It's the person who's also the most detached from their own emotions. And I think the reason Solomon can have 1,000 women, 700 wives, is because he's not looking for deep emotional connection. That's not what he's looking for. People joke all the time, my goodness, one wife is enough. How can you handle 700? He's not looking to have long conversations with these women, right? So he's a guy that's just all about his flesh, all about his pleasure. And then it says, they turned his heart away. Verse 4, when Solomon was old, his wives turned his heart away. There it is again, to follow other gods. Notice that phrase, by the way, when Solomon was old. How long did Solomon live like this? Decades. And over time, it doesn't happen in a week, doesn't happen in a month, probably doesn't even really happen in a year. But over time, we begin to live life in a certain way, and we orientate ourselves into the life that we live. And over time, all of these women, all of the foreign gods, turned Solomon's heart away from the God of Israel. He had no time to worship his God. He was so busy, focused on his kingdom and all the foreign nations that he was dealing with and all the success and the wealth that he was accumulating. He had no time to spend worshiping his God. And look what happens. It gets tragic. He was not wholeheartedly devoted to the Lord his God, as his father David had been. Notice, by the way, I love that the text keeps saying that. Was David's life imperfect? Did David battle his flesh? Did he struggle? Of course he did. Did he commit some gross sins? Of course he did. And yet, when it's all said and done, how do the scriptures still see David? He was devoted to the Lord. He was a man that in his heart, what never went away was the deep longing to want to follow and love and obey God. Even though he struggled with his temper, his anger, his flesh, he was a guy that knew how to repent and confess and come back to God. And it was a lifelong battle for David. See? All the way to the end of his days. This is how God views us. He does not ask us to live. He wants us to live perfect lives, but he says you can't. You can't live a perfect life. But I want you to keep striving. I want you to keep striving, because it's in the striving that God is glorified and pleased. So it says in verse 5, Solomon followed, look at this, Ashtoreth. That's a fertility goddess, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Milcom. These are wicked gods, the abhorrent idol of the Ammonites. Solomon did what was evil in the Lord's sight, and unlike his father David, he did not remain loyal to the Lord. These gods, Molech and Milcom, these were gods that you literally, to honor these gods, you would practice child sacrifice. We've dug these idols up in Israel. Some of these idols, it's the head of like a bull with the body and the arms of a man. And these idols that they had would be these bronze arms of a man. And you would heat these bronze arms up red hot, and you would take a child and you would place the child into the molten red blazing arms of this false god. And you would singe that child and offer it as a pagan sacrifice to their gods. And look what it says about Solomon. Solomon did what was evil in the Lord's sight. Solomon did that. How do you go from chapter 3 as a 17, 18-year-old kid, and God says, anything you want, ask me. I want wisdom. I'm going to give you so much wisdom. You're going to have so much wisdom, more than anybody has ever had. You become the wisest man who's ever lived. The world hears about you. All the way to now, 30 years later, you now are taking a child and you're allowing the offering of a child in sacrifice in your land, east of Jerusalem, by the way, where probably the Mount of Olives was. And he offers child sacrifice on his watch. Is that possible for the human heart to get to that place? What do you think? Is it possible to do something you thought you'd never do?
Absolutely.
We're going to take a few minutes and do some confession right now. I'm kidding. It's possible for all of us to do. Not just possible. Many of us have done those things that we never thought we would do. This is what happens to Solomon. At that time, Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the abhorrent idol of Moab, and for Milcom, the abhorrent idol of the Ammonites, on the hill across from Jerusalem. There it is. It's probably the Mount of Olives. He did the same for all his foreign wives who were burning incense and offering sacrifices to their gods. This is how Solomon now finishes out his life. Is that Solomon is, in one sense, the evil has gotten so deep and dark within Solomon's heart, he is incapable of turning his heart back to the Lord. There's just something in the heart of Solomon that he does not, we don't see him going back. In fact, the thing you see is that he did not remain loyal to the Lord all the way to the end. Never repents at the very end. Yeah.
So God in all his wisdom knew that, could see beforehand that Solomon would go this way.
Yeah.
So why did God give him all that wisdom and wealth and everything?
It's a great question, Dean. That's a Chad Miller question. Chad always asks the providential predestination question about this. I have a view that to me makes a lot of sense over how God operates like this, that allows humans to freely make these choices and for God to allow those choices to be made. I wish I had more time to kind of walk through it. I'll love to explain it to you sometime. But I do believe that God can perfectly know how Solomon will act. Solomon freely choose to act this way. And yet at the same time, God views Solomon's actions as setting the stage to ultimately fulfill his ultimate outcome. He allows Solomon to do this as a lesson in many ways. If Solomon didn't do this, Dean, guess what we wouldn't be doing right now?
Talking about it.
We wouldn't be talking about it. You know, as I was studying and reading this week, it makes me pause. It makes me stop and pause and look at my life and look at my heart and look at my stuff, you know. I think I told you guys back when we were meeting at Zira's, we did a similar passage. I think it was when we were going over the book of James. And I remember I walked into my closet and I wanted to count, how many dress shirts do I have? It's embarrassing. I look at how many dress shirts I think I had 98 dress shirts. Ridiculous. I'm going to be giving them away, by the way. If you're a medium, 16 and a half neck, 34, it's yours. But look, you just don't even realize. You just, oh, that's a cool shirt. I haven't worn that in a while, you know, yeah. And you just slowly, kind of move into this. It's not because, you know, I'm worshiping the gods of Molech. It's just easy to fall into just patterns of acquisition over time and years. And I've got shirts I've had 10 years ago that are still sitting on my rack. I just don't throw stuff away, right? Once every 3-4 years, I might have like a Goodwill bag, right? And just stuff accumulates. You guys ever have that, right? Anybody have an attic, storage unit? Just stuff starts accumulating over time. So we're meant to read this and stop and go, whoa. Let me look at my heart for a minute. Let me look at the way I'm living my life for a minute. Let me look at how intentionally I'm living my life. What are the things that have a hold of my heart? What are the things that I'm not opening my hands up to and releasing? See? That's what's meant to happen here. That's the principle that we're meant to see here. And so God allows these stories. It's like, why would God put David on the throne and have David commit adultery and murder to cover it up? And yet he's the greatest king Israel ever had. It's because we get Psalm 51. It's because we get the life of a man who pursues God, who can commit heinous sin, and every one of us go, Lord, thank you that you left David's story in the scriptures. Because it's a story of redemption. It's a story of restoration. It's a story of forgiveness, right? With Solomon, it may not be a story of restoration and redemption. What is it a story of? Warning. It's a cautionary tale. Be careful. Watch your heart. Guard your heart, for all the issues of life flow out of it. See? What did Jesus say? It's not what one puts into his mouth that makes one unclean. It's what flows from the heart, right? That's what makes one unclean. That's the idea. So I'm thankful for Solomon's story. I hate that this is the life that Solomon lived, and it's a cautionary tale for every one of us. So we'll stop right there. And we'll finish out chapter 11, beginning in 14 or 9 on. Look at verse 9, though. This is where we're going to start next week. The Lord was angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord. You know why the Lord was angry? It's because the Lord gave Solomon every possible chance. He came to him twice and spoke to him. Remember? In chapter 9, once he completes the temple and he completes building his palace, remember it says, and the Lord spoke to Solomon, and he gives him a warning. And he says, be careful. Watch your heart. Don't let your heart turn away. He gives him a warning. And Solomon hears the direct words of the Lord. And then in the very same chapter, and then in chapter 10, you see Solomon drift away, and his heart turns away from God. It's a cautionary tale. I'm gonna title it that, Dave. That's a great title. I'm going to title this chapter that on the video. It's a cautionary tale. Let me pray for us. Lord, we do thank you for the cautionary tales in the scriptures. There's so many of them, Lord. And Lord, in many ways, our lives, my life, is a cautionary tale to the people around me to be careful. Watch how you live. Watch where our hearts go. Watch what we feed our hearts. And Lord, forgive all of us in this room for all the many times this week that our hearts have drifted, that our hearts have been fed things that were not congruent, Lord, with flourishing in the way that you would have for us to flourish. So we thank you for 1 Kings chapter 10. Lord, I pray that all of us, as we leave here today, we would be more mindful of setting our hearts on you, Lord, and not allowing our hearts to slowly drift away. We bless you for this time. In Christ's name, amen.